A Galene Woman is someone who cares for themselves. Hi, I'm Cole, your host for A Galene Woman is, and welcome to our very first brand sparkling new podcast, which I am super excited for. Today we're starting with the big question, the reason why we're all here. What is self-care? We're going to look at the misconceptions, where Galene self-care came from, how I started my own little self-care journey, and ultimately the simplest and easiest ways for you to start your own true relationship with self-care. I'm also going to leave you with a few questions at the end to take with you for the rest of the week, to ponder, to consider, do with what you will, to make sure you have some self-care tools to get you going. First off, the misconceptions around self-care. I always find people's definitions of self-care really interesting because I think it really shows, especially for women, how the phrase has been totally warped. If you ask someone, say, whether they think eating for your nutrition or doing a session of meditation or having some sort of established skin, hair, fitness routine or any routine in general really is supporting their health, the majority will of course say yeah. However, if you rephrase that specifically in the context of is that self-care, there really seems to be a disconnect. For women, this disconnect definitely comes from social expectations. The idea that it's indulgent, expensive, wasting precious time on something that requires a sacrifice of another more important, more productive task absolutely permeates. I don't know about you, but I can see it in the mentality of pretty much all the women in my life and at any age too. It's definitely something we've been taught, definitely something we've learned. When I think about when I first started figuring out what self-care actually was in my own life, I think the first thing that came up for me was guilt. And this totally relates to the concept of women feeling like they can't take time for themselves. I couldn't shake this idea that truly taking time for myself was something that automatically made me selfish. You know, I was guilty of spending time on unimportant, non-productive tasks. But then as soon as I started unraveling that idea, it dawned on me so quickly that a lot of these wonderful women that I was looking up to, who were taking charge of their lives in whatever way they wished, women who spent time on their body and their mind and cultivating a life that they really wanted, were doing so with self-care at the forefront. So let's get into it. The biggest misconceptions around self-care that absolutely will stop us all from seeing self-care as an essential. First up, myth one, the idea that self-care is an all or nothing thing. I definitely believe that this stems from two problems. One, extreme hustle culture, and two, the idea that changing your life means changing everything. That moment where we want to take charge of our life, start fresh, buying different groceries for healthier meals, trying to implement that really extensive workout routine, waking up super early, all of our work done super efficiently. It's actually just kind of crazy, mainly because for me anyways, give it 4 or 5 days, if I'm lucky a week, and then the entire plan will absolutely fall to pieces. As well as this, it just instantly makes you feel like you've failed at looking after yourself, that you're not the kind of person who could and can be healthy or be productive or whatever purpose your self-care serves for you. James Clear, the god of habit setting, is a good reference point for this. If you don't make it easy for yourself to establish the system you want, you're not going to achieve it. Giving yourself the space to be imperfect and start as small as possible. This is actually what self-care is. Self-care is one step at a time, figuring out what you truly want from your time, your rest, your productivity. And I really think changing that perception massively changes the game when you allow room for getting things wrong. Imperfect progression to a more caring you is better than doing nothing at all. The second utter myth is that the idea of self-care isn't for everyone. This just infuriates me to no end. We're all people. There is, in terms of self-care, nobody who doesn't need it. Man, women, people in all, everyone. Period. That's it. We all deserve it and deserve to believe that we do. You deserve time for rest, recharge, so you can be your best self. The third myth kind of confuses me a little bit, and it's this concept that self-care requires specific resources that you don't have already. And perhaps it relates to the idea that you have to spend money or have particular things to do an activity for it to count as self-care. And this is probably coming back to the concept that self-care is only for particular people who have particular things. Sometimes self-care is simply watching a movie or having a necessary lie-in or going for a walk to clear your head. The necessity of stuff, in my head anyway, is simply there to make us feel bad about the fact that we don't have the latest skincare or the latest gym set or this, that, and the other, and force us into thinking it's not something we deserve. It removes the simplicity that self-care can really hold for us all. Myth 5. Self-care is selfish. I feel like this is like my women feeling guilty about taking time for themselves comment. I really, 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 really hate this idea. It perpetuates the sense that selflessness cannot include showing up for yourself, that you have to be at the beck and call of everyone else at the expense of your own health and healing. Let's just set the record straight now. You cannot be there for others if you don't show up for yourself with the same level of kindness, sensitivity, and care. You just will burn out, break down, whatever. Like, it just will happen. And I fundamentally believe your mental and emotional, maybe even spiritual health needs the self-care recharge to be there for others. You feel so much calmer and clearer too. It's so much easier to show up for those you care for if you take time for yourself. Self-care never was, never is, never will be selfish. So the next idea is that self-care is expensive. This is just another iteration of self-care requiring certain items to be self-care. But I do think this myth is somewhat more damaging because it gives off the sense that self-care is only for the elite few who can afford luxurious self-care retreats or slightly ridiculous items like LED masks or steamers or anything of that nature for your self-care to be complete. It's just not true, especially since self-care is so personalized. It's not that those items can't be self-care, it's just the fact that they're not the only form of self-care. And it's so important to remember that. Okay, myth 6. Self-care is a cure for mental issues. I always find those videos online that kind of suggest that the mental glow up that you want only requires for you to slow down and do some self-care. I find them really, really difficult. As someone who has to take medication for the mental health, or rather my PMDD, which in itself is a mood disorder, it feels like a bit of a punch in the face for someone to tell me that all I need to do is drink a cup of tea and I'll be fine. I just can't do self-care to solve all my problems. My situation is way too specific, and there are more barriers for me than simple overwhelm of a situation. Self-care isn't a cure for anything. It's a part of your holistic approach to your own health, and it should never be glorified beyond that or simplified into a solve-all solution. Anyone can do self-care, but the way that looks like in your life is totally down and up to you. Now those myths are busted, it's time to answer the question that's been running around your head while I've been telling you everything self-care isn't. What does self-care look like, and how can I use it, implement it into my life? I like to keep my definition of self-care pretty simple. Self-care is paying attention to our needs. It's setting real boundaries for ourselves, not to limit ourselves, but so we can nurture our own health and make real space for growth and happiness. Of course, it can be those classic self-care activities like baths, face masks, pedicures, but it's also an investment into our own physical health through our fitness and nutrition, an investment into our own mental health and emotional health too, giving ourselves a mindful and peaceful space to keep a clearer, happier mind. I also think a big element that gets overlooked, and one of the absolute core parts of A Galene Woman's mother space, GaleneCompany, is our investment into our sexual and reproductive health. Personally, this was a huge part of my own self-care journey. After finally getting my PMDD or premenstrual dysphoric disorder diagnosis and realizing how much my everyday life was being impacted by not knowing information about my sexual and reproductive health, I just knew it was time for me to actually embrace my health on a new level. And what came from that? A realization that most women were battling with these questions, conditions, and social stigmas around our sexual and reproductive health, and that we're still learning how to properly care for ourselves in that sense. So I started doing some digging on some of the stats around female sexual and reproductive studies and how much we truly know from a scientific perspective how to care for this part of our health. And honestly, the figures are staggering. So 90% of women suffer with some form of PMS before their period. So whether that's mood swings, abdominal cramps, fatigue, 90% of women experience symptoms. And yet more studies have been done on male erectile dysfunction, which about only 16% of men will ever experience in their life, than on PMS as a condition that women suffer with. Not only do I care about absolutely changing that fact, but I also want to learn more about it myself. I definitely don't have all the answers, but I want to figure them out, and I will make sure that I can tell as many people as possible. We should not feel guilty about wanting to look after ourselves, and we should not feel guilty about wanting to actually know the way our bodies work. I think this leads quite nicely onto the idea that self-care is intention. You're probably already doing the things that are self-care, whether it's exercise, eating well, having no screen time sections of your day, or taking time to watch a movie and truly relaxing. Creating a self-care routine is about seeing those actions as intentional moments of caring for yourself. That's why there is no time restraint, because if you see it as something contributing to your overall health, then honey, you did it. Self-care achieved, tick in the box. From an everything shower to simply making sure you're drinking a glass of water before you leave in the morning, you can mentally tick off something self-care related for that day. I do believe this is genuinely the easiest way to start incorporating self-care intentions into your day, starting by acknowledging what you already do consistently for yourself and yourself alone, and then build up to the desired habits, of which we can talk about later. To give you a couple examples, my self-care routine in the morning is actually super simple. It literally starts with making my bed, mental check, to make sure that my space is relatively tidy, because I know that I work and feel my best when I have a clear space. Then it's the simple things, brushing my teeth, making sure I eat breakfast, moisturizing, and SPF. And then I go and start my day with 20 minutes of yoga. Though this step I've only just added, and I've been focusing on doing the others intentionally for several months now. There is nothing in that routine that the majority of people don't already do every morning, but it's the change of intention and seeing it as an act of self-care and contributing to my overall health that actually makes it more impactful. So start with the absolute basics and build. I think once you've made that mental shift, then sit down for 20-30 minutes and truly think about the actions you want to include into your day. Again, start small, one thing at a time. I would like to think I'm the queen of hacking my brain to get myself to do the things that instinctively I don't want to do. But in an ideal world, I would. Honestly, in reality, I'm kind of lazy, and my sisters can absolutely attest to that. I don't naturally want to exercise. I don't naturally want to go to bed at the same time every day. I don't naturally want to do my boring uni work instead of hanging out with my friends. So I find the ways that will give me an incentive, and I make it super easy for myself. A good example is that I know I love, or my brain loves, the satisfaction of ticking things off. And I know I love a reward. So I definitely think it's quite a common thing. We all grew up with the aim of getting the gold star, but I think it's just tapping into that idea of do a thing for a certain amount of time and you get something. For example, with the morning yoga, I set out 3 rules. I had to do it for 2 weeks before I could get any sort of reward. And then I added on 2 weeks with another reward at the end of that one. I also made the reward super juicy. I love skincare, right? So my reward was that I could buy something from Boots. I think I went for a face mask in the end. But to be honest, by the time that I got to the second reward, I didn't really feel the incentive that much. I didn't really feel the incentive of getting the reward that much. I was just genuinely enjoying knowing the fact that I was someone who got up every day and did yoga. I loved having that as a confirmed, evidenced part of who I was. I wanted to be someone who did exercise every morning for 20 minutes. That's all I needed. And now I am that person. So what was the takeaway from that? Hacking my brain. Your love of whatever reward or system that means you can give yourself the evidence that you are someone who cares for themselves. Also, to add, the reward does not have to be something that costs money. I'm fortunate that I could do that, but finding an incentive extends beyond money for sure. And the majority of the time, rewarding myself is simply that of meeting up with my friends and hanging out with them, painting my nails, or having a movie night, of which I can do without spending any money at all, because that's what makes me feel good. And that's the key. Tapping into what makes you feel good. Find the reward if you want to use that system that suits you, and it will absolutely fill that role of incentivizing you to do the habit you want. And that brings us to the end of the first episode of A Galene Woman Is. I really love chatting to you guys, and I'm definitely going to put a little Q&A on Instagram to find out what you're doing to include self-care into your lives. Before we wrap up, I just want to say thank you for listening. I adore knowing that we're all on this self-care journey together and actually embracing ourselves and loving being who we are. I hope you've enjoyed our first episode, and please come and join us every week. Remember, self-care is not a guilty pleasure. It's your right. It's time we embrace it with open arms. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen, and follow us at GaleneCompany_ to find out what we're up to during the week. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.